Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
But then you had the events in Sueda, the bloodshed, where government forces were implicated in the mass killings of Druze. And of course, there was a lot of world reaction, including from the United States Congress, to those killings, and also directed at the interim government for failing to stop them and for being implicated in them. And at that point, you did see Barak sort of tone down all of that rhetoric. And he seems to have come around to the idea that this very tightly centralized model advocated by Shara and also by Turkey to some extent, you did see him sort of tone that down.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. U.S. President Donald Trump received his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, at the White House on Thursday for talks. Trump told reporters at a press conference that congressional sanctions on Turkey could be lifted, quote, very soon, while also praising Erdogan. Trump did call on the Turkish president to stop buying Russian oil amid the war in Ukraine, and made a reference to allegations of fraudulent elections in Turkey, saying Erdogan, quote, knows about rigged elections better than anybody. The visit was Erdogan's first to the White House since 2019, and was also attended by U.S. Ambassador to Turkey/Syria envoy Tom Barrack. Erdogan is in the U.S. currently for the United Nations General Assembly. Trump has been friendly with Erdogan for years, but there are a number of unresolved issues between the two countries. Turkey bought Russia's S-400 missile defense system in 2017, prompting them to be kicked out of the U.S.'s F-35 stealth fighter jet program. Turkey was then hit with congressional sanctions in 2020 that restrict U.S. military assistance to the country. In Syria, tensions between the U.S. and Turkey over American support to the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces has cooled. Turkey considers the SDF to be an offshoot of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, aka PKK, but Ankara was pleased when the SDF made an agreement with the new Syrian government, led by jihadist-turned-president Ahmed Ashara, to integrate into the new military. Still, the implementation of the deal has yet to occur. In this episode, we'll hear from Al Monitor's chief international correspondent, Amberin Zaman. Amberin goes over what needs to happen for Turkey to be readmitted into the F-35 program, whether Ankara can realistically break its dependence on Russian oil and gas amid Trump's pro-Ukraine shift, and whether the US and Turkey are actually aligned on Syria. We'll also go over Shara's historic visit to New York, in which he became the first Syrian head of state to address the UN General Assembly in half a century. Hope you enjoy. Amberin, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thanks for having me, Adam. It's always a pleasure.
Amberin, about this conversation between Erdogan and Trump at the White House, what do you think Turkey needs to do in order to be readmitted into the F-35 program that they so want to rejoin?
Well, according to the United States Congress, they'll have to get rid of the S-400 Russian anti-aircraft missile batteries, which provoked these sanctions in the first place. And how Turkey gets around that, I'm not quite sure, because obviously, if it were to try and, let's say, sell them to a third party, Russia would not accept that. I'm sure the terms of the agreement, in fact, preclude any such sale. Turkey's sort of formula so far has been to just not unpack them, to park them in some kind of a warehouse where they must be gathering lots of dust. But that's not good enough for the Congress. They want them to be removed from Turkish territory. Now, Erdogan believes that there is a way around this if Trump uses his executive powers to basically override the Congress on this, to remove the CAATSA sanctions. We heard Trump say yesterday that, in fact, he could do that, quote unquote, very easily if he wanted to, but suggested that Turkey needed to do certain things first He didn't say what those were, but during the press conference, he very openly called on Erdogan to stop buying Russian oil and natural gas. Now, that's a very difficult thing for Turkey to accept, if only because Turkey's, energy needs, more than 60% of its energy needs, natural gas and oil, are met by Russia. And, we're heading towards winter. So that's just very unrealistic.
On that note of the Russian energy, how feasible do you think it is for Turkey to reduce this dependence? Do they have any other options for their oil and gas needs, either in the short term or long term?
Well, we've seen Turkey increasingly resort to liquefied natural gas, LNG, and it's been getting LNG from various suppliers, from Qatar, from Algeria, and also from the United States. And as you'll recall, just right before the visit, Turkey big deal, a multi-billion dollar deal with a New York-based company, Mercuria, to buy more US LNG. That's one of the things it's looking at. It does have other suppliers, Azerbaijan for one, Turkmenistan is another one. And then there's, of course, Iran. But because of US sanctions on Iran, it's had to scale back those imports from Iran. There's also the potential further down the line of getting natural gas from Iraq and maybe even in Syria. However, Turkey is heavily invested in Russian natural gas. You have these vast networks of pipelines, including pipelines that run under the Black Sea, carrying that gas. It's one thing reducing the dependency on Russian crude. You could have other suppliers from the Gulf, for example. But on natural gas, it's going to be pretty tough. Well, of course, these demands are being made in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine and Trump signaling a new, tougher attitude towards Russia. And of course, it's almost gratuitous to ask countries like Turkey to do these things when many Europeans will tell you that the United States could be doing so much more for Ukraine, for example, for this conflict to end.
Pivoting to the issue of Syria, which came up during their meeting, how aligned are the US and Turkey on Syria? And do you think the issue of the SDF could come between them again sometime soon?
Well, it's hard to tell. What we're hearing from Washington is that, yes, they are aligned. And when we say aligned, we have to sort of recall that the US envoy to Syria is also the US ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barak, and he's a very close friend of the president, has his full trust, and has been given a very broad mandate for Syria and also for Lebanon, and at the same time, of course, for Turkey. And we do know that he enjoys an extraordinarily good relationship with President Erdogan that was very obvious from the images that we were seeing coming out of Washington yesterday when the Turkish president went up to him at the White House and sort of grasped his hand and then sort of poked his tie, telling him how beautiful his tie was. And Barak was sort of beaming, and you could see the chemistry there, that there really is this very good rapport. And at the same time, of course, Barak is also a huge advocate of Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara. And when he became the envoy back in May, very early on, he was advocating very strongly on behalf of Shara and repeating many of his talking points regarding federalism and how it wouldn't work for Syria and how it hadn't worked elsewhere, including in Iraq, which of course really upset the Kurds very much. But then you had the events in Sueda, the bloodshed, where government forces were implicated in the mass killing of Druze. And of course, there was a lot of world reaction, including from the United States Congress. to those killings and also directed at the interim government for failing to stop them and for being implicated in them. And at that point, you did see Barak sort of tone down all of that rhetoric. And he seems to have come around to the idea that this very tightly centralized model advocated by Shara and also by Turkey to some extent, though it's obviously not Turkey's place to dictate what model of governance there should be in Syria. You did see him sort of tone that down, but ultimately, since then, and you saw the reception that Shara got at the UN, and before that, you saw Barak taking Shaibani, the foreign minister, around the hill, introducing him to Congress people, and really being at his side and firmly behind him, all of which suggests that yes, they are aligned and that the Kurds will sort of have to consider all of this and maybe slightly shift their position, which is that they want firm guarantees, constitutionally enshrined guarantees of decentralized governance before they move on anything, including ceding territory that is Arab majority and contains quite a bit of Syria's oil and gas reserves, which is a big ask, one of the key asks of Damascus in these negotiations that are supposedly taking place between the sides. My understanding is that not much is actually happening.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Amberin Zaman after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Okay, we're back. Amberin, you mentioned Syrian President Shara's trip to New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and I wanted to ask you about that. What stood out to you the most from his trip?
Well, I would say, how he was welcomed by all the world leaders. I mean, he stole the limelight from Vladimir Zelensky. You would have expected Zelensky to sort of be the main attraction as he has been in the past. But no, it was Shara, and it's quite extraordinary. I mean, I'm not saying anything terribly original here, but just, over a year ago, this guy was sitting in his military fatigues in Idlib, branded a terrorist by the United States, still is by the United Nations, by the way. And there he was, shaking the hands of world leaders. You saw him meet with President Trump and his wife, the First Lady Melania Trump. There was a lot of sort of mirthful commentary about how Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was gazing at him almost adoringly. He seems to have a lot of charisma. I have not met him myself, but that's what people say. And that in and of itself is huge. But of course, what really matters to him right now and to Syria are Caesar sanctions. They need to be removed if Syria is going to move forward, if people are going to come in and invest. Handshakes and glamour at the UN isn't enough. People in Syria want results. They want to see this translated into a better life for themselves. And that can't happen really until the sanctions come off. And of course, as you know, there is this sort of debate inside the Congress over whether they should be removed unconditionally, which the administration appears to be advocating for, and others who say that no, this should be conditioned on the government's progress on, integrating minorities, reform, democracy, those kinds of things.
Amberin, thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to more of your reporting on Turkey, Syria, and everything else.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.